Hello, I'm Stephen Galpin and welcome to Property Question Time. This is the programme where you'll have your property related questions answered by a team of experts, and joining me today are John Howard, property developer, author, investor, mentor, and lots of other things too, I think.
Yeah, I'm busy.
Busy chap.
I am.
Good to see you, John. And Byron Crellin, all the way down from Chester.
Indeed.
Hope the train was a good journey for you.
It turned up on time, so high fives.
That's a start, isn't it? Anyway. Okay, well, you'll soon have HS2, so don't worry too much.
10 years, we'll be fine.
10 years time. All right. Well, let's get on with the questioning, and John, we'll start with you. Are the experts seeing a downturn in rental property take-up with what seems to be an ever upward spiral of rental rates? In addition, is this a market trend that's been replicated countrywide? Well, here you are. Here's a chance to get outside of my London thinking and tell us what's happening in the rest of the world.
It's been breaking news for you.
Well,
This is breaking news for you because you only listen to the London news. The rental market across the whole of the UK is incredibly hot. Increases in rents between 10 and 15%. I know in London it's been 12 to 20, but I think the average is about 13 over the country.
I can tell you this morning, the figures are out this morning, John, yes, and it's over 18% across the UK and 16% in London.
That's amazing. That's even more than last month.
This isn't good socially, is it?
No, it's not good socially, and I think the government are going to look at this. Michael Gove is now the housing minister again, or the Secretary of State for Housing.
Well, at least that keeps the numbers down, doesn't it? That's down to about 14 in the last 10 years.
Let's not get into the political scene. What I would say is, I think they will look at rent caps and so on. Of course, they've tried it in Southern Ireland. 2016, they put rent caps on, and it's been a disaster. They've done it temporarily in Scotland, where it's till March, the end of March.
6 months, isn't it?
Rent caps. They always had rental zones in Scotland where you couldn't put the rent up, but the rent caps I'm not sure. I think the government are going to do something to try and control it, and I'm not sure you can control the market. I don't know what you think on that, but I think it's very difficult to start when you start meddling with the market.
Well, just to add to those figures, John, the average apparently residential rent in London now is 2,300 per calendar month.
It doesn't surprise me. Look at the value of properties. You could argue pro rata, that should be a lot more than that when you look at the value of the properties.
Well, I'm guessing that probably represents a 3-4% return on capital. That's probably
at the most, I would say. And of course, the one thing, I mean, my portfolio and other people's portfolios, if you haven't got capital growth, to be honest with you, you haven't got much. Because by the time you've paid your mortgages and repaired the properties, you're not left with a lot of money. You are potentially, if you're doing serviced accommodation, but that's temporary. You know, you can't hold your hat, you can't hang your hat on that for 5 years because you don't know what's going to happen.
We come at it at the other end. So we're dealing with the possession take back. And obviously, for the last 2 years that's not happened, and that's now happening. I think the government needs to address the timeline for a landlord to be able to get back their property, residential property. Commercial property, you don't need to go to court. It's the only piece of legislation in English law that you don't have to go to court to get a judgment to get a property back on commercial. Residential, we've got a classic client, rented a property in London to a tenant. Tenant 3 months later stopped making payment, had changed the locks. It's going to take our client approximately between £6,000 to £8,000 to get a writ of possession. To go through the court process, probably round circle is going to take them 3 months.
I think you'd be very lucky at that in London.
Well, a friend of mine they paid 1 month's rent and never paid anything. Went to court, took him, and it's taken him a year to get them out.
There is a fine line between hardship and people that
they didn't use you.
But
it's the difference.
Well, correct. But there is, I think, there's a line here between hardship and what we determine as serial offenders. And I think there's got to be the government have got to introduce a fast-track solution for the residential market space.
That will not be popular. They won't do that because they've got an election in 2 years' time, and it won't be popular. They're kicking out tenants, blah, blah. But they're going to do the opposite.
I know
so
that.
In Wales, for instance, they've just, I think it was announced on Friday in Wales, it's now 6 months before you can get a short old tenant out.
Well,
just on a normal
Sadiq Khan's sort of hoping to bring something in on this.
no fault evictions.
Well,
And I think Gove will bring that in. I think there'll be he's talking about it, no fault evictions.
And Scotland's completely
But
different.
I'm not sure, John. Do people understand what no fault eviction means?
Well, it means.
So you come to the end of your tenancy,
yes.
right? You've got a 12-month tenancy. You come to the end of it, you go, or do you not go?
You can if you don't want to go, you stay forever. Which means.
But what's then the worth of a 12-month tenancy?
Well, what it means, Stephen, is we're going back to the 1980s when we had assured tenancies, which was market rent, but you couldn't get the tenant out. Now, long term, that's great news for me, because we end up paying 30% less for these properties as investments because we can't get them out. We then work the tenants out and they leave.
But if we go back to the 80s,
we sell them for 30% more. So actually,
but if we go back to the 80s,
long term, it's a good thing.
If we go back to the 80s and look at that horrible rental regime that was in place then, you'd be flogging your portfolio to a Mr. Rackman, who would use various means of getting the tenants out.
I think for the viewers who are younger than us. Rackman was a landlord. His name was Rackman, who was a landlord who doubled or trebled up the accommodation. In other words, he rented beds on an 8-hour basis.
A 2-bedroom house
had 20 people in it.
Yeah, 16.
And that's where the name Rackman comes from in the 1960s. We're not going back to that, Stephen, are we? But I'd have to say this government, for a Conservative government, have got very left-wing plans when it comes to landlords and property development.
They've forgotten why they brought in assured short-hold tenancies in the late 80s.
Which Thatcher brought in.
Which Thatcher brought in to add stock to the market and to let landlords know that given that they honoured their bit of the deal and the tenant honoured their bit of the deal, you could get your property back at the end of
and why shouldn't you? It's your property.
Yeah.
It's your property.
But if we're going to move away from that,
they are moving away.
Well, legislation now is archaic in the residential market space. More your space than it is mine. I'm commercial. But we deal with clients that have got residential portfolios, and they've got tenants in occupation that weren't their tenants, that they were there by the legal consent, that have moved in, so as subtenants. They're there by non-contractual, but they can't get them out. They have to go through this long-winded court process. It costs a lot of money. You know,
well,
and I think
the
for our
backlog
viewers,
in the courts now is just unbelievable.
But for our viewers, they've had a 2-year where they've not been able to get somebody out of a property that has no intention of making payment. Now, I totally accept you've got hardship people that have lost jobs or are on lesser income because of COVID, and that's just a factor of life, and people work through that process.
But the law in this country is that no one is allowed to be homeless unless intentionally made homeless themselves. Right. So let's not kid ourselves here. The people you see on the streets, sadly, have made themselves intentionally homeless by one means or another, and it's very sad. They've got different issues. Very
quickly, we had one client, residential property, and the individual opened the door and said, "You need to evict me, because if I go on my own, then I'm homeless."
Yep. But you see, I'm afraid our safety nets are not actually that good these days. I mean, I know within the City of London, they had this idea that they would go to the homeless people last year, well, actually during COVID, and say, look, we have found you hostel spaces. You must go, and if you don't go, we're going to arrest you.
The local authorities, that was their remit. Get them off the pavement.
Was, but of course you have to remember a lot of these people are saying, no, thank you. I'd sooner stay on the street. It's safer and it's better. So it's our safety net that's wrong, isn't it?
Yeah.
But there we are.
It's very sad. Let's be honest. If you're in that situation, for whatever reason.
Whatever reason, yeah. Okay, Byron. As an experienced commercial surveyor, I'd like to know if the panel can advise if there has been any noticeable uptrend in commercial properties being repossessed following the end of the government's restrictions on this.
Yeah, I mean, we have, and I think that's probably expected because of 2 years of this sort of arbitration period. So I think we've seen an upturn in repossessions, but I think we've seen an upturn in repossessions where historically we would go terminate the lease and the former tenant would then make contact with us to say, "Oh, can I have access to get my stuff back, etc." A higher percentage of repossessions that we're doing at this moment in time are because the recognised legal identity on the lease is insolvent, gone, and what they've got in there is what we call a pre-pack. So Mr. Smith.
Is this going back to the subject that we touched on in earlier conversations about people just reforming a company and leaving debt behind?
And I've said on previous shows, I think it's dangerous at this moment in time to try and suggest that there's a trend in the market space, because there isn't a trend, because we've got pockets of the UK that are trading differently to how, we've got a client on commercial, industrial, fully occupied, waiting list. We've got other clients geographically elsewhere where it's a case of it's rent-free for a month. And it's monthly rent rather than quarterly in advance.
Yeah, we've all had to do that.
And rolling. So they're having to sort of be flexible in terms of our viewers' question, the surveyor's question, in terms of repossessions. Yes, we have seen an upturn, but I don't think that's unexpected. I think that's a lot of clients cleaning databases, probably realising they're accepting rent from tenants that aren't lawfully the recognised tenant because we've gone through that pre-pack process, or they have just entered into a voluntary arrangement, and now it's the case of the shackles are off. Let's say the government's restrictions to get it a bit more tidier in terms of knowing who you're billing and who's basically responsible from a legal point of view and paying rent.
What amazes me is the enthusiasm there are from tenants to want to start a business. We all talk about, we've all been a bit negative in the last few shows because for what's happening, but actually I've got a few tenants, new tenants going into commercial property, and you have to admire them. You really do have to admire them.
Is this filling up the high streets at a cheaper rent?
I think, partly yes, certainly the rents have halved in the high streets without question. If you've got an investment in the high street, you can just about, it comes to an end, you can re-let it, I'm sure, if the rent's half what it was, probably. Out of town, it hasn't made it's virtually as it was, or even improved slightly. But in town, it's a big problem. But amazes me the amount of brave, entrepreneurial, aspirational people there are in this country who will give it a go. And you need, and we try and support them, because obviously they're starting a business. They may want a break clause, after 2 years rather than 5 or whatever it might, the lease wise. But we try and support them and help them because why wouldn't you? And the government may do. The government may come up with some grants for these people, because I think it is the future. It's the future of the high street.
Okay, there we are. That's all we've got time for in this half of the show. So I'm Stephen Galpin. Join me and Byron Crellin and John Howard after the break, when we'll be answering more of your questions. Hello and welcome back to Property Question Time with Byron Crellin and John Howard. Welcome back, guys.
Thank you.
John, I'll be careful with this question because I think it's a little bit out of date, but maybe not. We'll see. The government announced today, this was some time ago, that they were going to reverse the decision to bring in no-fault evictions, which we've been talking about.
Yep.
Is this a good thing, or would it have to some extent stabilise the letting market with greater tenant retention? Now, I think because we've had a change of PM and a change of setup, although the government are very keen to say, oh, the last government, as if it was nothing to do with them, haven't they? But I think really what's happened is, I think Michael Gove's come back, and I presume that a lot of his indications of legislation are going to come in now, aren't they?
Well, they seem to, and Michael Gove seems anti-landlords, anti-house builders, all pro-tenant, and to be honest with you, this current government is probably as left of centre and closer to Labour. There's no difference, hardly, I don't think, between what Labour would be saying and what the current Conservatives were saying. And as a Conservative donor and president of the local association, we're all a bit mortified by it, to be quite honest with you. But anyway, that's another story. So the idea of no-fault evictions, what they're saying is that there's lots of tenants now who want to remain tenants for long periods of time. A lot of them are families, and they've got children in school and all the rest of it. And the point is, what they're saying is they don't want their children, the tenants' children's school interrupted and things like that. So what they're saying is, no fault evictions. So if you sign a tenancy agreement, you can basically stay as long as you want.
John, can I just jump in there with you?
And it'll be a vote winner for the Conservatives. That's what they think.
Maybe, maybe not, because I would say to you that when you talk about a tenant wanting to stay in situ long term, historically, that's been people who perhaps are given in their younger years when they get married a council property, and that council property becomes the family home. Therefore, they don't want moving, they don't want disrupting, they're part of their local community, they're part of the local school and all the rest of it. I just wonder quite so much whether what I would call residential but commercial tenants, in other words, those that are renting because they're saving up for a deposit, want to buy, want to move on, whether that actually applies.
Well, I would say there's more tenants now. I think in the old days, you're absolutely right. But I think these days there are more tenants who are, couples with children, and probably trying to save up for a deposit. But I mean, it's not easy for a lot of.
I don't know how they do it on the rents today.
I don't know how they do it.
It's cheaper to rent than to buy.
It's cheaper
to rent.
I'd say it's cheaper. It was cheaper to buy than
if
rent.
you've got the deposit, Byron, I think it's cheaper to buy.
Yeah. What I would say,
but getting the deposit.
Getting the deposit is the issue.
And that's why the government, with the new homes, came up with Help to Buy and all these other schemes, which I think, by the way, they'll bring back in some shape or form. They're going to have to, in my view. But for me, it's a wrong thing to do for the government. And like we said before, it's like going back to the 1980s. I don't think it's a good move. And bear in mind, there's thousands of landlords in this country, and they'll say, well, if you want to get your property back to live in yourself, you can do. Well, how many people want to do that? Most of them are professional landlords these days.
But I don't know whether it was trust or go, but haven't they taken now the targets off for building new homes?
No, the target came off under Liz Truss for 3 weeks. I was at the conference, Byron, and they've all gone. The people I was trying to talk to have all gone. They're no longer of any importance to me whatsoever. I can't remember who they were now. What was the question? Sorry.
I mean, it just seems to me that we're getting sort of contradictory messages.
Oh yes, about the three. Yes, so Gove has come out and said there is a target again of 300,000. Now, they built 220, most they've ever done is 228,000, I think. But don't forget, going forward, all these big house builders, and 70% of the house building in this country is carried out by the top 10 house builders. They're all going to mothball sites. They're not going to carry on building if they can't sell. It's the most naive comment you've ever heard in your life from Gove, but that's typical. I mean, he's a journalist at the end of the day, so,
I mean, when the government keeps saying we're going to build, I mean, who do they mean? Who's we?
They mean people like us.
Well, exactly.
We spoke off camera, and we know that the top 10 they are slowing down. They're mothballing sites. They're slowing down. Yeah. We provide security on a number of the sites, and I can tell you now, there's no activity. No.
Do you know what? In all the years I've been involved around property development, it's dead simple. Yep. If a developer thinks he can flog what he's building, he'll build it.
Yep.
And if he don't, he won't.
Exactly. Mothball it.
End of story.
Yep, absolutely.
And if that causes mothballing of land, well, so be it.
Yeah, exactly. At the end of the day, they're all ruthless.
Yeah. And
the social housing tenants, social housing landlords and people keep building, of course.
But they're not profit driven, are they?
But their market is banked, isn't it?
Yeah,
pardon the pun.
But really, that's the local authority market, isn't
Correct.
it? Because it's the local authority that dictate the tenants or whoever goes in. So whatever. I personally, I just think we need a whole rethink of the whole damn game, really. But there we are. We're not going to get it, are we?
No, we're not.
Okay. Right, Byron. I'm a commercial tenant, and having just managed to get through the pandemic, I'm now under pressure to pay back my bounce back loan, as well as other business debts. Can the panel advise if there is any additional government support for small businesses so that payment can be deferred whilst I'm trying to manage other creditors?
I think the bad news is no, it's got to be paid back, and the government have been quite clear on that.
You can delay it a bit, can't you?
You can delay it, but it's all down to negotiation now. because restrictions have been removed. It's now down to tenants and landlords working together, as they successfully did for 2 years through the arbitration process. There is the ability, which we've seen through insolvency numbers, where you can liquidate the business, providing there is a real criteria that meets. You can't just liquidate a business because you think it's a good idea. You've got to meet a criteria to be able to liquidate, i.e. the business is insolvent, it's not meeting its liabilities, etc. It's got there's no recovery path for it, etc. And in part of that insolvency will be all of your debt. And therefore there is, and that's why we have seen a bit of a trend by businesses to go, well, I can park that, then not pay it back and dump it.
Byron, let me ask you. The question is quite an interesting one, actually, because he's saying, look, is there any way I can treat my bounce back loan a little bit differently than I can treat my other creditors? I think that's the number of the question in a way.
I think the thing is...
Hold on. So the bank come on to him and say, oh, we want this business loan paying back. What's to stop him saying, well, you know what, the government guaranteed that, so you've not got a problem, so I'm just not going to pay it. I'm going to concentrate on my other people. Don't be bothering me. What's to stop him saying that?
I think you'll have people that will, and I don't think necessarily just through intelligence, business intelligence, I think they'll just ignore it in the old sort of head in sand approach. They'll just go, well, I know I've got to pay it back, but I can't afford it. So therefore, if I don't look at it, it's like my VAT, I know I've got to pay that.
But the government have guaranteed it, haven't they?
Well, the government have guaranteed it, but they've said that you've got to pay it back. So the options are, you can negotiate a payment plan with a landlord. That's what's happening. And the landlords are...
but it's not the landlord of the business bounce back loan, is it? It's the bank.
No, correct. So I'm saying, so you can negotiate. I've not seen any stats that come out that says that, here's a raft of tenants that have been successful in negotiating. What we have seen is, on the flip side, is insolvencies increased. Last quarter, biggest spike again, number of insolvencies recorded. Now that's telling us that's companies coming out of a pandemic and going, well, what's my options? You've got to pay it back, or you could liquidate, subject to meeting a load of criteria. And they're liquidating.
How tough do you think the government will be on the banks about this guarantee? Do you think they will say to the bank, for instance, we want to see that you've sort of prosecuted this person to the nth degree before we will pay over our guarantee?
I think they'll hide behind the fact that, again, you can only liquidate a business if you meet criteria that says that this business is in severe financial distress.
But for a lot of these people, it's not hard to prove that, is it?
No, absolutely, and that's what the trends are showing us. As I say, biggest spike in insolvencies last quarter.
Okay, well, just 30 seconds each for the last minute of the show. Where are we going with this recession, Byron?
Tin hat, be brave, negotiate. Just try and get through it.
Okay, John.
If in doubt, do nout. An old Yorkshire saying, if you're looking to...
You're not Yorkshire, you're
My
Ipswich.
father was Yorkshire.
Oh, right.
From Yorkshire.
Okay.
If in doubt, do nout. And I think if it's a case of just, as Byron says, put a tin hat on, get through the next 6-9 months, have another look at the situation. I think you'll buy property cheaper in 9 months' time than you will now.
Okay. Well, John Howard, Byron Crellin, thank you very, very much for your answers. I'm sure there's a lot of viewers that are going to be very grateful for your input on these matters, because they are matters of today, and they are very serious matters and causing people a lot of sleepless nights, I'm sure. So thank you both very much indeed.
Thanks, Stephen.
I'm Stephen Galpin. Join me next time on Property Question Time, and we'll try and answer more of your questions then.